Previously, forced into marriage to secure their father's empires, Evelyn and Marin move from open hostility to unexpected cracks in their armor. A rooftop dinner sparks reluctant laughter. A gala reveals Marin's hidden anxiety that Evelyn quietly soothes. And a boardroom meltdown ends when Marin's calm touch disarms Evelyn's fury. What began as a cold merger is shifting into something far more dangerous and undeniable: connection. Link is in the description for part 1. The world did not simply shift on its axis. It dissolved, burned away in the furnace of that first night, leaving only the four walls of Ellie's bedroom and the woman in her arms. Dawn broke, not with the gentle promise of a new day, but with a stark, blinding revelation of what they had become. The first thing Ellie was aware of was scent. Her own sheets, which usually smelled of sterile, expensive laundry detergent, were now infused with the warm floral notes of Quora's perfume and the musk of their sweat and sex. It was an intoxicating primal aroma that made her head spin. The second was weight, the delicious, grounding weight of Quora's leg thrown over her hips, an arm draped possessively across her stomach, and a head of messy dark hair pillowed on her chest. Quora stirred, her breathing changing. Ellie held perfectly still, afraid to break the spell. Had it been a dream, a spectacular, world-altering hallucination? Then Quora's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were soft, unfocused with sleep. Then memory flooded in, and her gaze sharpened, locking with Ellie's. A faint blush crept up her neck, but she didn't look away. She didn't retreat. Instead, a slow, sleepy, utterly smug smile spread across her lips. "Morning," Quora murmured, her voice husky with sleep. That single word, that look, shattered the last of Ellie's defenses. A possessive, overwhelming hunger roared back to life within her. She didn't answer with words. She answered by rolling them over, pinning Quora beneath her, and capturing her mouth in a deep, claiming kiss that tasted of sleep in them. There was no hesitation this time, no shock, only a mutual, frantic need to pick up where they had left off. The duvet was kicked to the floor. The careful space of the night was annihilated. The next hours were a blur of sensation, a lost day outside of time. They were ravenous for each other, discovering a map of each other's bodies with a frantic, worshipful attention. Ellie, the woman of stone and ice, discovered she had a mouth made for prayer and sin. She learned that Quora's skin tasted different everywhere, salty at the hollow of her throat, sweet along the inside of her wrist. She discovered that the spot just behind Quora's ear made her gasp, and that a trail of kisses down her spine made her arch and shudder. But it was Quora's thighs that became her obsession. The powerful, elegant strength of them, the softness of the skin. She spent what felt like an eternity there, kissing, nipping, licking, mapping every inch. She loved the way Quora's breath would hitch, the way her fingers would fist in Ellie's blonde hair, trying to pull her away and draw her closer simultaneously. The helpless, broken moans that fell from Quora's lips when Ellie's mouth finally found its true destination were a symphony Ellie knew she would crave for the rest of her life. She felt like she was starving, and only the taste of Quora could sate her. For Quora, it was a revelation of a different kind. She discovered a playfulness, a wicked sense of humor lurking beneath Ellie's ferocity. In a lull, breathless and tangled, Quora traced the line of Ellie's jaw. Who knew? Quora amused, her voice still breathy, that the mighty Ellie Sterling could be so thorough. Ellie's responding grin was feral, her dimple flashing. "I'm a perfectionist. I don't do anything by halves." She leaned down to nibble at Quora's lower lip. "And you, Ms. Rossi, are a very complex project. Requires my full and complete attention." They laughed, the sound mingling with their kisses. Quora discovered the incredible power she herself held. She learned that a well-placed bite on Ellie's shoulder could make her groan with pleasure. That trailing her nails lightly down Ellie's back could make her buck and writhe. That whispering a filthy, unexpected command in her ear could make Ellie's blue eyes darken with instant blinding need. She discovered that Ellie for all her dominance and control, loved to be taken care of. There was a moment late in the afternoon when Quora simply held her, stroking her hair as Ellie lay with her head on Quora's chest, utterly spent. Ellie, who never showed weakness, who never stopped moving, was completely still and pliant in her arms. Quora felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it stole her breath. This fierce, dazzling, unguarded woman was hers. They only abandoned the bed for essentials: food, water, breath, and brief stretches. Water was pulled from the kitchen, swallowed fast, standing bare before the fridge. A tray of cheese and fruit was carried back, devoured off one another's skin in a burst of laughter that felt more intimate than any kiss. They fed each other strawberries, the juice trickling onto flesh to be licked away. The light shifted beyond the panes, sliding from the pale gold of morning to the stark white of afternoon, to the deep orange of dusk. They didn't care. Clock. Time meant nothing. Time was a currency they no longer had to spend. In the quiet spans between bouts of urgent passion, they spoke. Not about work or their fathers, but about nothing, small, ridiculous things. Ellie admitted a childhood crush on a terrible cartoon. Quora confessed she secretly loathed opera and thought it pompous. They traded tales of college blunders, of botched dates, of hidden frailties. The walls weren't just down, they were dust, and they were raising something new in the rubble. The dynamic that had defined them for months, the reluctant truce, the quick jabs, the grudging respect had been completely burned away. What remained in its ashes was an open, all-consuming fixation. They couldn't stop touching each other. A brush of fingers while handing a glass of water would become a deep, searching kiss against the kitchen counter. A shared joke would send them tumbling back onto the tangled sheets, laughter sliding into moans. They were learning each other, and in that learning, they were truly finding entirely new versions of themselves. Ellie, the protector, was discovering how to be defenseless. Quora, the steady anchor, was learning how to set them both adrift on a sea of feeling. As the second night drew down, painting the room in heavy shadow, Ellie propped herself on an elbow, gazing down at Quora. Her hair was wild, her mouth was kiss-bruised, and her eyes were dark with a wonder that felt entirely new. "I don't think I can ever get enough of you," Ellie breathed, the confession falling into the hush between them. Raw and honest, Quora lifted a hand, tracing the arch of Ellie's brow, her smile gentle and sure. "Good," she said softly, "because I have no intention of ever letting you try." The world outside, with all its demands and expectations, waited. But for now, it could wait forever. They had everything they needed right here. The Met Gala was the most scrutinized, photographed, and dissected event of the year. A year ago, the idea of attending together would have filled both Ellie and Quora with a sense of dread. Another battlefield in their Cold War. Now, as their sleek town car glided toward the crimson carpet, it felt like they were rolling toward their victory lap. The change started before they even left the car. Ellie, dressed in a breathtaking vanguard gown of sculpted black onyx beads that looked like armor, wasn't sitting stiffly in her corner. She was turned toward Quora, her fingers laced with Quora, her thumb idly stroking the back of her hand. Quora, in a gown of flowing liquid silver that seemed to change color with every movement, was leaning into Ellie's face, her head tilted as she listened to something Ellie was whispering, a genuine, easy smile on her lips. A year ago, their stylists would have agonized over presenting a unified but separate front. Tonight they were a matched set. Night and day, stone and water, a perfect complementary pair. The second their car door was opened, the wall of sound hit them. The roar of the crowd, the frantic yelling of photographers, the blinding, relentless flash of 1,000 cameras. It was a sensory assault that would have once made Quora's palms sweat, and Ellie's jaw tighten into a performative smirk. Tonight, they simply shared a look. A tiny private smile passed between them, a silent ready. Ellie nodded almost imperceptibly, And then they stepped out. The transformation was immediate and electric. Where they had once walked the carpet with a foot of cold space between them, they now moved as a single unit. Ellie's hand wasn't hovering near Quora's back. It was resting possessively on the small of it. Her fingers spilled, claiming her territory for the entire world to see. Quora didn't hold herself apart. She leaned into the touch, her shoulder brushing against Ellie's with every step. They paused for the photographers, but the poses were different. No more stiff, separate stares. They faced the cameras together, their bodies angled toward each other, their gazes constantly flicking back to one another, as if they were the only two people in the universe. When a photographer yelled, "Ellie, Quora, over here," Ellie didn't just turn. She turned, saw the angle, and with a soft, intimate smile, gently used the hand on Quora's back to guide her into the light, her touch lingering. The whispers started immediately. Fashion commentators on their live streams gasped, "My God, look at them. The chemistry is palpable. They can't keep their eyes off each other. This is a completely different couple from the one we saw at the Children's Hospital Gala." Inside, the spectacle continued. At the champagne reception, they were a fortress of two. When a stuffy old-world baron tried to monopolize Quora's attention, Ellie didn't hover impatiently. She simply slid her arm around Quora's waist, pulled her close, and pressed a firm, unmistakable kiss to her temple, her eyes never leaving the baron's, a silent primal warning. The baron blustered and excused himself. Quora just laughed, a low, throaty sound, and leaned her head against Ellie's shoulder for a second. Their table was a masterclass in intimate disregard for everyone else. They were seated with a famous actor, a tech billionaire, and a European duchess. They were polite, engaging in the required small talk, but their real conversation was happening underneath the table. Ellie's hand rested on Quora's thigh, her thumb drawing slow, absent circles on the silver fabric. Quora's hand was atop Ellie's, her fingers toying with her rings. Their heads were often tilted close, trading private quips, their laughter low, a shared secret beneath the room's roar. During one especially tedious speech, Ellie leaned in, her lips grazing the curve of Quora's ear. Quora braced for a cutting remark about the man's tie or his company's sinking share price. Instead, Ellie murmured, "I've been replaying that thing you did this morning against the shower wall." Quora's breath snagged. Heat climbed from her chest along her throat. She turned, her nose nearly brushing Ellie's. "Oh, and what, precisely, were you pondering?" "That I need an encore. The minute we're home." The look they traded was so charged with raw, hungry promise that the Duchess across the table actually fumbled her program. The press spun into a frenzy. By morning, the images were everywhere. Clips looped on morning shows, gossip sites refreshed by the minute, and social feeds flooded with edits, captions, and breathless threads dissecting every single glance, touch, and playful grin. Not those stiff, uneasy shots from months earlier, but a reel of stolen tender moments. Photo 1. Ellie whispering at Quora's ear, a wicked smile lifting her mouth. Quora tipping her head back in unguarded laughter. Photo 2. A kiss to the temple, Ellie's face fierce with protectiveness, Quora's eyes shut in ease. Photo 3. Their hands intertwined on Quora's thigh beneath the table. A connection so effortless it told more than any heated embrace. Headlines were breathless. Ice Queen thaws. Sterling and Rossi are the season's hottest power pair. From corporate merger to love match, the Sterling-Rossi romance lights up the Met. Look of love. How Ellie Sterling's gaze says everything. Richard and Christian, tracking coverage from Richard's office, were elated. This exceeded their boldest PR fantasies. The story had cleanly shifted from coarse marriage of convenience to storybook romance of the year. Market writers were already applauding the synergy and unified vision the pair projected. Shares in both firms edged upward. "I'll admit it, Richard," Christian said, swirling a brandy as he watched a clip of Ellie tucking a stray lock behind Quora's ear. "I wasn't sure they could pull this off, But this is flawless. Richard allowed a rare, unguarded smile. I never doubted them for a second. It was untrue, but pleasant to say. He'd seen the way his daughter stared at the Rossi girl. It wasn't an act. It was something far more potent and far more useful. They've made the brand human, relatable. It's brilliant. The performance was indeed over. But what had replaced it was no less potent. It was the real terrifying and magnificent truth. They were in love, and for the first time they didn't care who saw it. In fact, they wanted the whole world to watch. Their love was no longer a secret to be kept in the dark. It was a flag they were planting at the very top of the world, defiant and brilliant for all to see. The media storm had been raging for a week. The pictures from the Met Gala were inescapable, splashed across business journals and tabloids alike. The narrative had spun utterly out of Richard and Christian's carefully controlled design, and into something wild, organic, and dangerously real. They could no longer pretend this was going according to plan. A meeting was imperative. They summoned their daughters to Richard's office on a Sunday afternoon, a time chosen for its imposing quiet and the implied seriousness of interrupting a weekend. The stage was set for confrontation. Richard had prepared a speech about public image and the dangers of excessive, unconvincing displays. Christian had rehearsed a gentle but firm paternal admonishment about maintaining a believable distance, about not overplaying their hand. They expected drama. They expected resistance. They expected their daughters to arrive separately, wearing identical expressions of bored defiance, ready to argue that their performance was exactly what had been demanded of them. They were wrong on every count. Ellie and Quora arrived together. They entered the office not as two separate entities, but as a single unit. Their movements synchronized. They were casually dressed, Ellie in black tailored trousers and a simple silk tank top, Quora in dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, which somehow made them seem more formidable, more authentically themselves than in any boardroom armor. And they were holding hands, not for show, not in the staged way they had for early press events. Their fingers were laced together, a natural, comfortable clasp that spoke of a deep and practiced intimacy. Richard, standing behind his desk, and Christian, perched on the edge of a leather armchair, fell silent. Their rehearsed speeches evaporated in the face of this simple, undeniable fact. "You wanted to see us," Ellie said, her voice even. There was no challenge in it, no defensiveness, just a calm statement of fact. Christian recovered first, his fatherly concern mask sliding into place. "Yes, we just wanted to touch base. The coverage lately has been intense." He gestured vaguely toward the window as if the headlines were floating past. "It's wonderful that the public is buying into the story, of course, but we just want to ensure you're not overextending yourselves. The performance can be taxing." Ellie and Quora exchanged a look. It was a full silent conversation conveyed in a raised eyebrow from Quora and a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug from Ellie. The kind of look that takes months to perfect. The kind of look that can't be faked. Quora spoke, her voice as calm as Ellie's. "What exactly is your concern, Papa?" Richard finally found his voice, cold and analytical. "The concern is that enthusiasm, when not meticulously managed, can appear desperate. The market responds to confidence, not to fervor. The hand-holding, the constant touching, it reads as immature. We advised a merger, not a teenage romance." He expected Ellie to snap. He waited for the flash of ice in her eyes, the sharp retort about minding his own business. It never came. Instead, Ellie's grip on Quora's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. She looked not at her father, but at Christian, including them both in her gaze. "It's not a performance," she said, and the simplicity of the statement was more devastating than any outburst. A beat of stunned silence. Christian's smile was strained. "Now, girls, of course, it is, and a brilliant one. You've convinced everyone, but let's not lose perspective. This is at its heart a business arrangement. No, Quora said, and her voice was firmer now. Leaving no room for argument, she turned her body slightly toward Ellie, a subtle shift that spoke of alignment. It's not. Richard's eyes narrowed, flicking between them. He was a master of reading people, of seeing the hidden leverage, the concealed weakness. He saw none of that here. He saw only a terrifying, unshakable solidity. Explain, he commanded, his voice low. Ellie took a small step forward. You wanted a merger. You got one. But you don't get to dictate the terms of it. Not these terms. She looked at Quora, and for the first time in her life, Richard Sterling saw his daughter's expression soften into something utterly, devastatingly genuine. We're in love. The words hung in the cold, sterile air of the office. They were so simple, so absurdly cliché, and yet they carried the weight of a seismic shift. Christian stared, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at his daughter, at the calm certainty on her face. He saw the way she was looking at Ellie, not with tolerance or strategic affection, but with a deep, abiding warmth he hadn't seen in her since she was a little girl. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She's happy. Truly, genuinely happy. The thought was so foreign, so entirely disconnected from his original goal that it left him reeling. Richard's analytical mind scrambled. This was an outlier, an unpredictable variable. Love was not a quantifiable asset. It was a liability, an emotion that clouded judgment. He looked at his daughter, the human weapon he had forged, and he saw that the weapon had developed a heart. He saw the protective way Ellie's thumb was stroking the back of Quora's hand. He saw the way Quora leaned into Ellie's space, a silent offer of support. This wasn't a strategy. It was a symbiosis. This, Richard began, but the usual arsenal of cutting remarks failed him. He could threaten disinheritance, but the look on their faces told him they'd walk out that door together without a second glance. He could question their judgment, but their united front was the most formidable negotiating stance he had ever witnessed. He was for the first time in decades outmaneuvered. We understand this may not have been the outcome you anticipated, Quora said, her diplomat's voice returning, but softened with a new authority. But it is the outcome. We will be merging the companies. We will be marrying, but we will be doing it as partners in every sense of the word. Ellie finally turned her gaze directly to her father. The ice was back in her eyes, but it was no longer directed at Quora. It was for him, a warning. The business proposition stands. The legacy is secure. But the rest of it, our relationship, is ours. It is not a PR strategy. It is not an asset for you to manage. Are we clear? The silence that followed was absolute. Christian slowly sank into the armchair, his eyes glistening with emotion he couldn't name. He had gotten everything he wanted. The merger, the legacy, the security. And in getting it, he realized he had almost missed the one thing that actually mattered. His daughter's heart. Richard Sterling looked at the two women standing before him, their hands clasped, their postures defiant yet serene. He had wanted to blend to families, to companies. He had not anticipated that they would instead create something entirely new, something stronger than he could have ever engineered. He had played God with their lives, and they had responded by performing a miracle. Finally, he gave a single slow nod. It was not a gesture of warmth, but one of utter defeated capitulation. He was a master of the game, and they had just changed all the rules. Crystal, he said, his voice hoarse. The performance was over. The truth had taken the stage, and it was far more powerful than any of them had ever dreamed. The world knew it as the wedding of the century. The press coverage was omnipresent, a relentless drumbeat building up to the grand event. The guest list was a who's who of global power, titans of industry, political dignitaries, celebrities, and every major business publication. The ceremony was to be held in the soaring glass-enclosed conservatory of the Sterling estate, a venue transformed into a breathtaking cathedral of white orchids, white roses, and delicate strands of pearls that dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain. It was a masterpiece of cold, flawless beauty, a perfect mirror of the union the world believed it was witnessing. But for Ellie and Quora, the real wedding happened hours before in a quiet, sun-drenched sitting room overlooking the gardens away from the stylists, the coordinators, and the crushing weight of expectation. They found each other. They had slipped away, a silent, shared instinct drawing them to this moment of peace before the storm. They stood before the window, hands already linked. Ellie was in her tailored white tuxedo, the sharp lines a contrast to the soft vulnerability in her eyes. Quora was in a simple silk robe, her elaborate wedding gown waiting on a form nearby. They were just themselves, stripped of the pageantry. "You're shaking," Ellie murmured, her thumbs stroking Cora's knuckles. "So are you," Quora whispered back, a soft smile touching her lips. They were a fine shared tremor ran through them both, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming magnitude of it all. This was the day their fathers had engineered, the business deal they had raged against, and now it was the day they were giving to themselves. "I don't want to wait," Ellie said, her voice low and intense. "I don't want to say what I need to say to you in front of all of them. That's their show. This is ours." Quora nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes, there was no officiant here, no contract to sign, just the two of them and the truth that had grown against all odds in the space between them. Ellie took a steadying breath. The woman who commanded boardrooms with a look was nervous, her gaze fixed on their joined hands before she forced herself to look up, her blue eyes blazing with a sincerity that was terrifying and beautiful. "Quora," she began, her voice rough with emotion. "They think this is about mergers and legacies. They think they forced this. But they didn't. They just brought me to the door. You are the one who made me want to open it." She swallowed hard. "You saw the worst of me, the monster I thought I had to be, and you weren't afraid. You leaned in. You quieted the storm in me. You are my calm and my shelter, and the only person who has ever made me feel truly completely safe. I vow to be your shield. I vow to spend my life making sure you never have a reason to feel that anxiety again, because your peace is my peace. I love you, not because I have to, because every cell in my body refuses to do anything else." Tears were streaming down Cora's cheeks now, silent and happy. She brought Ellie's hands to her lips, kissing them. "Ellie," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the tears. "They think they bought my compliance with an inheritance. They have no idea they gave me the only thing that could ever truly be priceless." She reached up, her thumb gently tracing the line of Ellie's jaw, a touch so familiar and cherished it made Ellie's breath catch. "You are the most brilliant, infuriating, passionate, and loyal person I have ever known. You make me laugh. You make me brave. You make me want to be a better woman. Not for a balance sheet, but for you. I vow to be your anchor. I vow to be the home you come back to, the quiet place where you can set down all that weight you carry. I will never ever try to put out your fire. I will just stand beside you and make sure it warms us instead of burning the world down. I love you. It is the easiest, most natural truth of my life." They didn't have rings to exchange yet, so they exchanged something else. Ellie leaned forward and rested her forehead against Quora, closing her eyes, their breath mingling. It was a silent vow deeper than any words, a communion. When they finally pulled apart, the world outside the window had not changed, but everything within them had. They were married. Their souls had signed the contract long before their hands would ever put pen to paper. The public ceremony was a beautiful, distant dream. They walked down their respective aisles, met in the middle under the floral arch, and recited the elegant pre-written vows their PR teams had approved. Their voices were steady, their smiles radiant, but they didn't see the sea of famous faces. They didn't hear the orchestra. They only saw each other when the officiant pronounced them married. The cheer from the crowd was a distant roar. Ellie's hands came up to cradle Quora's face, her touch infinitely gentle, and she kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck for the cameras. It was a slow, deep, promise-filled kiss that spoke of the vows they had already made in the quiet of the morning. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine, and I am yours, and this is just the beginning." They held hands throughout the entire reception, their fingers laced together as if they'd never learned to let go. They danced, and Ellie, who never danced, moved with a natural grace, her entire focus on the woman in her arms. They laughed at the toasts, but their laughter was a private thing, their eyes constantly seeking each other's, sharing a joke that only they understood. Richard Sterling watched his daughter, truly watched her. He saw the way she looked at Quora with a softness he didn't know she possessed. He saw the way she instinctively pulled Quora closer when a crowd pressed in, a gesture of protection so innate it was clearly unconscious. He saw for the first time his daughter not as a successor, but as a woman in love, and the sight was more shocking than any business coup she had ever pulled off. Christian Rossi watched his daughter, and he saw the anxiety that had so often haunted her eyes replaced by a serene, unshakable joy. He saw the way she grounded Ellie, a simple touch of her hand on Ellie's arm enough to smooth a furrowed brow. He saw her confidence, not the professional kind she wore like armor, but a deep personal certainty that came from being utterly and completely loved. The world saw a power couple, a merger of empires, a storybook wedding. But Ellie and Quora, they only saw each other. They had taken the cold business proposition handed to them and had alchemized it into pure solid gold. The wedding was a beautiful facade. The real marriage, the unbreakable bond, had been forged long before. Married life did not calm the storm between Ellie and Quora. It simply gave the storm a permanent address. Theirs was not a quiet, placid union. It was a dynamic living thing, a brilliant, sometimes terrifying, and endlessly fascinating ecosystem of two powerful forces that had chosen to orbit one another. The world saw the public face of it. Sterling Rossi consolidated. They were a feared and admired entity, a partnership that moved through the business world with devastating efficiency. In the boardroom, they were a perfectly synchronized machine. Ellie was the spark, the visionary lightning strike, unafraid to tear down old systems and demand the impossible. Quora was the architecture, the master planner who could take Ellie's raw, explosive ideas and build sustainable, impregnable fortresses around them. An investor foolish enough to try to pit one against the other would find himself neatly dismantled. Ellie would eviscerate him with a few sharp, cold truths about his company's liquidity, while Quora would calmly, methodically present a spreadsheet detailing every one of his failed ventures over the last decade. They defended each other with a ferocity that became legendary. A journalist who wrote a sexist hit piece on Quora's leadership style found his publication facing a mysterious multi-pronged financial audit and a sudden total blacklisting from every Sterling Rossi affiliate. No one ever proved Ellie's involvement, but the message was received. Quora was hers to protect. But the true heart of their marriage beat in private within the walls of their shared penthouse, a space that was no longer Ellie's cold monument, but a true fusion of their tastes. Ellie's stark modern art now hung beside Quora's classical pieces. Quora's books filled the once empty shelves. The kitchen, once for show, was now often filled with the smell of coffee Quora made in the mornings and the elaborate meals Ellie would sometimes attempt and often burn on nights they insisted on being alone. Their obsession was not just sexual, though that fire burned as hot as ever. It was a total immersion in one another. They were each other's first thought in the morning and last before sleep. Ellie, who had never remembered anyone's preferences, now knew exactly how Quora took her tea. 1 sugar, a splash of oat milk, and that she needed absolute silence for the first 20 minutes of her day. Quora, who lived by schedules, had memorized the subtle signs of Ellie's rising temper, a specific tension in her jaw, a certain way she would tap her pen, and had an arsenal of ways to diffuse it. From a well-timed joke to simply standing and taking her hand, leading her to the sofa for a 5-minute reset. Their nightly rituals were sacrosanct. The world and its demands were locked out. No business calls, no emails. It was their time. Some nights were passionately physical, a frantic, hungry reclaiming of each other after a long day apart. Others were deeply domestic. They would cook together or read on opposite ends of the same sofa, their legs tangled together, sharing quiet commentary. Ellie's head would often find its way to Quora's lap, and Quora's fingers would automatically begin to stroke through her blonde hair. A gesture so natural it was like breathing. It was in these moments that Ellie's formidable intensity would finally, completely dissolve, leaving behind a woman who was soft, content, and utterly at peace. The physical language they developed was now a complex, fluent dialect. A hand on the small of the back at a gala meant, "I need a moment away from these people." A certain look across a crowded room meant, "Let's go home now." A kiss on the temple was a thank you, a bite on the shoulder, a promise for later. Ellie's protectiveness was a tangible force. She was Quora's fierce shield against the world's pressures. Her innate aggression perfectly channeled into defense. She managed their social calendar like a general, ensuring Quora was never overwhelmed, effortlessly running interference with anyone who demanded too much of her time or energy. In turn, Quora was Ellie's calm anchor. She was the only one who could navigate the tempests of Ellie's temper, not by challenging it, but by simply standing steadfast in its eye. She had a dozen ways to ground her: a hand on her wrist, a specific look, the simple act of resting her head on Ellie's chest, a gesture that never failed to halt the rising tide of anger. She was the keeper of Ellie's rarely softness, the one who could make her laugh until she cried with a perfectly timed, dry observation. Their love was a possessive, all-consuming thing. They were not two halves of a whole. They were two complete, formidable entities who had chosen to intertwine so completely that to separate them would have been a kind of murder. They were obsessed with each other's minds, each other's bodies, each other's happiness. In the end, their father's cold business proposition had yielded a return on investment they could never have calculated. They had wanted a merger of assets, a blending of bloodlines. They had gotten that, and in spades. Sterling Rossi was a juggernaut, but they had also inadvertently given their daughters the one thing neither had ever known how to provide: a true partner, a sanctuary, a home. Ellie's stone heart wasn't just melted, it was beating in time with Quora's. And Quora's professional composure wasn't a mask anymore. It was the calm of a woman who was deeply, passionately, and completely loved. As they sat together on their balcony one evening, Ellie's head on Quora's shoulder, watching the city lights bloom below them, their hands were linked, Ellie's thumb tracing idle circles on Quora's palm. "You know," Ellie murmured, her voice sleepy and content, "my father asked me yesterday if the merger was meeting initial projections." Quora smiled, pressing a kiss into Ellie's hair. "And what did you tell him?" Ellie turned her head, her blue eyes catching the twilight, her dimple appearing as she grinned. "I told him the numbers were irrelevant. We've achieved something off the charts." She leaned up and kissed Quora, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of love, of promise, of a future they had built for themselves on their own terms. It was the final, beautiful twist in their story. The reluctant merger had become the love story of a lifetime, and the most successful deal either of them would ever make. Epilogue. The center of their universe. The first thing Ellie became aware of was not the pale pre-dawn light, seeping through the automated blackout shades, but the scent. It was the scent that greeted her every morning, the one that meant home, safety, everything. It was the warm, floral notes of Quora's skin, the clean scent of her shampoo on the pillows, and the faint musky sweetness of their love-making that still hung in the air like a sacred incense. She was lying on her side, her body spooned perfectly against Quora's, her arm a possessive weight around her wife's waist. Quora was still asleep, her breathing deep and even, Her dark hair fanned out across the pillow, tickling Ellie's chin. Ellie didn't move. She simply lay there, committing the feeling to memory all over again. The silk of Quora's skin under her palm, the gentle curve of her hip, the way her body fit against Ellie's, as if they had been carved from a single piece of stone. Last night had been intense, a slow, relentless rediscovery of each other after a grueling 3-day business trip that had kept them apart. It had started with a heated argument over dinner about a competitor's move. An argument that had quickly dissolved into charged glances and the frantic unbuttoning of shirts. The second the penthouse door had closed, it had continued for hours. On the sofa against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering city. And finally here in their bed until they had collapsed, sated, boneless, and utterly drunk on each other. Their whispered promises and breathless laughter fading into the quiet of the night. A soft chime, the gentlest sound their state-of-the-art home system could produce, began to murmur through the room. 6:30 a.m. The world was waiting. Ellie felt Quora stir in her arms, a soft, protesting murmur escaping her lips. "No," Quora mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. She pressed herself backward deeper into Ellie's embrace. "Tell the world to go away." Ellie smiled, a slow, lazy, deeply satisfied smile. She nuzzled the back of Quora's neck, placing a soft kiss right below her ear, the spot that made her shiver. "The world has a rather compelling representative who won't take no for an answer," she whispered, her voice husky. Quora sighed, a sound of pure, contented reluctance. She turned in Ellie's arms, their faces inches apart on the shared pillow. Her brown eyes, still hazy with sleep, focused on Ellie's. A matching smile touched her lips. 5 more minutes, she bargained, her hand coming up to trace the line of Ellie's jaw, her thumb brushing over the dimple that appeared. "We said that 20 minutes ago," Ellie countered, but she was already leaning in, capturing Quora's mouth in a deep, languid kiss that tasted of sleep in them. It was a kiss that held the echo of last night's passion and the promise of tonight's. It was a kiss that could, and very often did, derail entire mornings. Their bodies, still humming from the night's activities, responded instantly. Ellie's hand slid from Quora's waist down to the curve of her thigh, hiking the silk nightgown up. Quora's leg hooked over Ellie's hip, pulling her closer. The 5-minute reprieve was going to be forfeit. They both knew it. They both welcomed it. This was the daily war they fought. The war between their all-consuming obsession with each other and the adorable tiny dictator who ruled their lives. The second round of gentle chimes was slightly more insistent. With a groan that was equal parts frustration and amusement, Quora broke the kiss, resting her forehead against Ellie's. "She's going to come looking for us." The thought of their 4-year-old daughter, Aurelia, padding into their room with her favorite stuffed dragon, was the only force in the universe powerful enough to override their desire. It was a stronger motivator than any stock market crash or hostile takeover bid. "I know," Ellie sighed, her voice filled with a fond exasperation. She gave Quora one last quick kiss. "The things we do for that girl. We created a monster," Quora said, her eyes sparkling. "A perfectly adorable tyrannical monster." They untangled themselves from the sheets and each other with palpable reluctance. Ellie swung her legs out of bed, stretching her arms over her head with a feline grace. Quora watched her for a moment, the love and desire in her gaze so open it made Ellie's breath catch. Even after all these years, it still stunned her, this unwavering devotion. They moved through their morning routine in a quiet synchronized dance, brushing shoulders in the bathroom, sharing a single toothbrush tube, their eyes meeting in the mirror with silent, intimate communication. They pulled on soft, comfortable clothes, cashmere lounge sets for lazy Saturday morning. Ellie's was black, Quora's a pale gray. The walk down the hall to Aurelia's room was their favorite pilgrimage. The penthouse, once a monument to minimalist coldness, was now a warm Lividan home. Aurelia's artwork, lopsided sons and stick-figure families with 2 mommies, was framed and hung beside million-dollar paintings. A small, brightly colored plastic toy train sat permanently on the mid-century modern coffee table. Ellie paused at the carved oak door, which was painted with a whimsical scene of dragons and castles. She looked at Quora, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Ready?" Quora nodded, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "Go on." Ellie pushed the door open slowly. The room was a riot of color and soft light. A princess's castle, designed by CEOs with unlimited budgets and zero ability to say no to their daughter. And there, in the center of a bed shaped like a fairy tale carriage, was their universe. Aurelia was still asleep, a miniature angel with a riot of dark curly hair just like Quora's, and a stubborn, determined set to her mouth that was all Ellie. She was surrounded by a plush army of dragons and unicorns, one chubby arm flung over her favorite, a well-loved green dragon named Sparky. Ellie and Quora crept to either side of the bed. They shared a look, a silent countdown. Then they descended. Ellie's fingers found Aurelia's tummy, tickling her gently. Quora went for her neck, blowing a soft raspberry. Aurelia's eyes flew open, and instead of crying or being startled, she erupted in a peal of the most glorious, unadulterated laughter. It was a sound that could melt glacier and heal broken hearts. It was the sound Ellie and Quora lived for. "Mommies," she squealed, wriggling. Between them, her little face alight with joy. The tickle attack subsided, replaced by a shower of kisses. Ellie covered her face in loud, smacking kisses, making her giggle harder. Quora gathered her up, holding her close, inhaling the sweet little girl scent of her crayons, bubble bath, and unconditional love. "Good morning, my precious girl," Quora whispered into her hair. "Did you have good dreams?" Ellie asked, brushing the curls from her forehead. "I dreamed Sparky and me flew to the moon," Aurelia announced, her eyes wide with a memory. "And we had cake for breakfast. Did you now?" Ellie said, her voice mocked serious. "And did you bring us back any mooncake?" Aurelia giggled. "No, silly. We ate it all." She wrapped her arms around both their necks, pulling them into a clumsy 3-way hug. "I love you, Mommy." "Ellie, I love you, Mommy." Quora, in that moment, wrapped in the arms of her wives and her daughter. Ellie felt the last vestiges of her stone heart dissolve into dust. She met Quora's eyes over their daughter's head and saw her own awe and gratitude reflected back. They were the luckiest women in the world. But more than that, they knew with absolute certainty that Aurelia was the luckiest girl. Her existence had been the final glorious miracle in their story, and her impact had rippled out, changing everything and everyone in its path. Later that afternoon, the doorbell chimed. Aurelia, who had been helping Quora arrange flowers, dropped a handful of petals and shot toward the door like a tiny rocket. Grandpas, Richard and Christian stood in the hallway, looking as they always did on these visits, slightly out of place and utterly enchanted. "There's our girl," Christian boomed, sweeping down to pick Aurelia up as she launched herself into his arms. He was no longer just the sharp, charming businessman. He was putty in her small hands. Richard stood straighter, but the coldness in his eyes had long since been replaced by a soft, bewildered warmth whenever he looked at his granddaughter. "Hello, Aurelia," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Grandpa Rich, Grandpa Chris. Look, I made a picture." She wriggled out of Christian's arms and grabbed each man by a hand, dragging them into the living room to show off her latest masterpiece. Ellie and Quora watched from the doorway, leaning into each other. They watched as Richard Sterling, the man who had once believed emotion was a liability, got down on his hands and knees on the expensive rug without a second thought, so Aurelia could explain her drawing to him. They watched as Christian Rossi, the master negotiator, happily agreed to a wildly unfair tea party treaty, where he was required to drink 10 cups of imaginary tea. These men, who had built empires on cold logic and ruthless strategy, had been utterly dismantled by a 4-year-old. They adored her with a ferocity that bordered on the comical. Richard, who had never attended a school play in Ellie's life, now had his secretary block out entire days for our Elia's nursery school recital. Christian had been known to leave a multi-million-dollar negotiation early because he'd promised to take her to the zoo. Aurelia had taught them love in an entirely new dimension. It was a love without conditions, without strategy, without end. They would have burned their companies to the ground if it meant protecting her from a single moment of hurt. She was their redemption, their greatest legacy, and the only thing in the world they were afraid of. As the afternoon sun streamed into the room, illuminating the scene of two powerful grandfathers being utterly commanded by a tiny queen, Ellie slipped her hand into Quora's. "We did good," Ellie murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer feared. Quora leaned her head on Ellie's shoulder, watching their daughter place a plastic crown on Richard's perfectly coiffed silver hair. He didn't flinch. He just smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We did," Quora agreed softly. "We built a universe, my love, and she is its brilliant, beautiful son." And in their perfect, messy, love-filled universe, they were all unquestionably the luckiest people in the world.